Welcome back to our next session, Discovery of the Doctrine of Salvation Throughout the Ages. And we have begun with last session the discovery of Catholic doctrine of salvation, Catholic understanding of salvation. And last session we discovered the importance of baptism. Like baptism opens the way for the other sacraments to work. So baptism, and this was the important point, and it will be very important for this session, baptism makes a person ontologically means internally righteous, essentially righteous. So this is, what is this mysterious term, this mysterious idea of ontological or essential righteousness? So let me explain this very simply. In the scripture we find this verse in Isaiah 64:6, all our righteousness are like filthy rags. So that means throughout the lifetime our righteousness is like filthy rags. It's never good enough, will never be good enough, and so on. Not so in Catholicism. Not so in Catholicism. Why? And here is a important point. In Catholicism, remember those two balls here that I have, or those two circles? One represents sanctification and the other one represents justification. So for Pelagius and Augustine, in their theologies, they are totally apart, totally separately, they have nothing to do with each other. In Pelagius, you've got just this, okay? Salvation by our works, by obedience, by once you're a Christian, you just obey, and then you get saved. That's all there is to it. In Augustine, takes opposite direction. There's nothing we can do to save. So this sanctification idea plays absolutely zero role in our salvation. Within the predestinarian thinking, there's no need for sanctification in order to be saved, right? So this is the point. So what happens in Catholicism is this. They're just taking those two concepts and they merging them into one. So it is like I would take those two, okay, justification and sanctification, and I'm going to squish them together, okay, and I'm going to squish them completely until they disappear into one another. And what color I'm going to get if I do it long enough? Okay, blue and yellow, I am going to get green. All right, you can already see in this little ball, the more I do it, the more I work with it, the more it's going to become green. Okay, so you can see it's already green. It's a mixture of justification and sanctification. Justification is not a separate concept. Sanctification is not a separate concept. They are mixed together into one. So now you're looking at that ball. After baptism, that's what happens. Okay, so can I separate those two now? Can I? See, it's impossible. I try to separate those things, and it's just totally impossible to make it again into blue and yellow. Just impossible. Okay. When you combine, this is an important point. When you combine justification with sanctification, that makes sanctification the ground of salvation. Did you catch this? When you combine justification with sanctification, that makes sanctification the ground for your salvation. That means your obedience begins to play a role in salvation. It is essential, it is required. Without obedience, you cannot enter heaven. That's basically what it says. So here is Council of Trent, the famous council that responded to the Reformers and their teaching of justification by faith. This is what the Council of Trent Decree on Justification states. Justification itself, which is not remission of sins or forgiveness of sins merely, but also the sanctification and renewal of the inward man. Did you catch it? So when does justification happen? Initial justification happen at baptism. All right? So this is not just remission of sin, but also sanctification. So justification and sanctification are just one one term, just one thing. Catholic theologians don't always like us Protestants doing this, that we tell that they mix justification with sanctification, and you will find that they often go to great lengths to trying to distinguish those two. But that statement from Council of Trent nullifies anything that they're going to say. So if you find on the internet somewhere statement from Catholics that no, we don't mix justification and sanctification, you can use this statement from Council of Trent and tell them, oh, but it says that justification, sanctification are same thing. And as you shall see how interesting it is, how it works out. So just a little bit later during this presentation. So following baptism, there is a infusion of grace. And Catholics are not just reckoned righteous, they are made righteous. Did you catch this? They're not just reckoned as righteous, they are actually made righteous. And here's another quote from Council of Trent. He makes us righteous. We are not only reckoned, but truly called and are just, receiving righteousness within us. This is ontological righteousness. This is that internal righteousness. From being unrighteous, from being a bad person, through baptism, I suddenly become a righteous person. I'm made righteous. Another statement. Justification is not only the remission of sins, but also the sanctification and renewal of the interior man. It's a similar quote to the other one, but this comes from Catechism of the Catholic Church, not from the Council of Trent. And another quote, justification conforms us to the righteousness of God. That means somehow internally we become righteous, who makes us inwardly just, righteous by the power of His mercy. So this means that following baptism, believers become righteous. They were unrighteous, they become righteous. And now they have their own righteousness, and now they can build on this. Okay, they can become more righteous. And this has huge significance for Catholic understanding of salvation. Because once God makes people righteous, they internally righteous, God develops a covenant or introduces people into covenant that is called in Catholic theology, or at least was until the Reformation, pactum theology. Pact is a covenant, all right? That's something that you agree. Within the pactum theology, you cooperate with God. Cooperation, now catch this, cooperation is essential for salvation. Without cooperation, you may not get saved. Cooperation, actually, you're working together. Okay, once we hear this justification, sanctification mixed together, you working together with God, you can go higher and higher towards salvation. So we could say this in a simple mathematical formula. God's work, God initiates the salvation, God creates this desire for the people to be baptized, either infants or adults, and then God works with me. My effort is righteous, okay? My effort, I can do something with this. All of this equals salvation. So once again, quote from Catechism of the Catholic Church. Justification establishes cooperation between God's grace and man's freedom. Did you hear this? Justification establishes cooperation. When does justification happen? When is the first time a person is justified? At baptism, as you saw from the quotes from Catechism. So now that you are justified, you can cooperate with God. This is huge. So let me show you another diagram. As you see, I really like diagrams because they do explain so a lot. So God makes a pact with humanity. This is kind of an agreement or covenant. I do this, you do this, okay? You get baptized, I will infuse my grace into you. That will enable you to work well. So here is baptism, initial justification, infusion of grace, enables you to cooperate because, and the cooperation, the foundation for the cooperation is your internal righteousness, and then you are justified. So there's initial justification at baptism, and there's a final justification. So you can be you will be justified on the basis of your work, and that work is known as merit. And I'm sure you've heard about this term, that word merit. So let me just illustrate this. Say a company wants to hire me because I'm a highly skillful worker, I have certain skills and they really want to hire me. And they say to me, we want you to work for us and you be a part of that company, but we're not going to pay you. We want you to work for free. Is this just or unjust? I mean, a logical answer is this is totally unjust. This is exploitation. If I have certain skill and I get employed, I want to get paid. You know, the justice requires that that company pays my wages so that I can live. Working for free, well, if I was a millionaire some other way, then yeah, sure, but most of us are not. So this is unjust. I have family to feed, mortgage to pay, car payments, groceries and so on. I believe that the company, if they want to employ me, they need to pay me. That payment is called wages. So in a similar way, you find this in a Catholic theology. That skill that I have for that company is a good skill. My merit is a good skill, is a good thing. It is also by God's grace that I can do it in Catholic theology, but that is worth something. What I do is worth something. Did you see this? So God cannot just discard it, right, and say this is not worth anything, because I've got this internal righteousness. My good deeds are good deeds. They're really good deeds, and I need to be rewarded for them, because if I'm not rewarded for them, then there's no justice. God is not just. All right? I hope this is clear. So this is how it works within Catholic theology. My merit earns good grace from God. By doing good things, I actually am earning merit, because my good acts are no longer filthy rags. They're good acts because I'm internally righteous. So here's a quote from, and by the way, that merit can be earned through 10 commandments. Okay, so here's a quote from Council of Trent. But no one, how much soever justified, ought to think himself exempt from the observance of the commandments. No one ought to make use of that rash saying that the observance of the commandments of God is impossible for one that is justified. For God commands not impossibilities, but by commanding both admonishes you to do what you are able to do. Did you catch it? God gives the commandments and they are not unreasonable. And because you have internal righteousness, our righteousness, my righteousness, when I obey the commandments, the obedience is really good. And I can do other good things. I can go on pilgrimages, I can go to church, I can give some money here and there. All those things are good that God wants to reward. So this is exactly because we are able to keep the commandments. We have this ability within us, ability to keep the commandments, because God would not ask something that is impossible. So, okay, you have this, once again, this picture, initial justification, then cooperate, and justification. This is this ontological righteousness that allows us to do it. And ontological righteousness is nothing different than our righteousness. I can obey. And God promises within Catholic theology, this is a statement that was developed within Catholic theology just before Luther. Facienti quod in se es Deus non denegat gratiam, which means God will not deny grace to those who do their best. You do your best, try your best, okay, try your best. You observe the commandments as best as you can, and God will not deny His grace to you if you obey well. But wait a minute. God's word, my effort, cooperation equals salvation. Isn't it what we Seventh-day Adventists sometimes teach? Don't we have to cooperate with God and be obedient to the commandments so that I can be saved? What do you think? Isn't it what sometimes we teach in our churches, that we have to obey in order to be saved? Well, if we do, guess where this theology comes from? It's certainly not from the Bible. So, let me continue, okay, with this Pactum theology. In this system, and this is fascinating, in this system, justification can be increased. Now, how can that be? Normally, we could accept that sanctification can be increased, but not justification. Here's the secret. If justification is confused with sanctification, then justification can increase. Are you catching this? Okay, justification you can be more justified, right? So not just initial justification, but you can be more and more and more and more and more justification, because justification is mixed up with sanctification. So a believer can increase his or her justification. Baptism is the beginning, and increase of justification can occur throughout the lifetime. So here's a quote from Council of Trent. I would encourage you, if you are interested, to read the Council of Trent Decree on Justification. It's a fascinating read, that's just an eye-opener. Through the observance of the commandments of God and of the Church, faith cooperating with good works, believers may increase in that justification which they have received through the grace of Christ. Isn't it fascinating? You can increase your justification, you can be more justified. And it's only possible when justification is mixed with sanctification. That's it. So in summary, how are humans saved? Well, there is this covenant theology, pactum theology. God does his thing, I do my thing. So in Catholic theology, salvation is via faith, by faith, and by works. By faith that God created this in me, so I get baptized and God works with me, and I work with God, and I can just become more sanctified, which is more justified, really. Okay? Nobody in Catholic Church gets saved by faith alone. It just does not exist. Salvation by faith alone is totally impossible. And you will see Council of Trent just speaks over and over against salvation by faith alone in response to the reformers. Justification is mixed up, with obedience, and that's basically you saved by just sanctification. Sanctification, your obedience becomes the ground for salvation. You must obey if you want to be saved. So good works are real good works. This is good stuff. Like before baptism, they're worthless. After baptism, because you've got this ontological righteousness, those works are good works. So God must reward them. If God does not reward good works, he is not a just God. Of course, this is a little bit more complicated in Catholic theology, but this is in a nutshell. Believers can increase their justification. As you saw the quote from Council of Trent, the Decree on Justification, that's exactly what it says. Throughout your life, you can increase your justification. And what is the end of it? And here's an interesting thing that many people don't know. Catholic Church teaches sinless perfectionism. The end goal, because you've got this internal righteousness, because you can do it, because you've got this righteousness given to you by God after you are justified, now you can obey, and you can obey perfectly. And Catholic Church has something that is called state of perfection. It is the technical term, word for this is unitive state. So there are three states in Catholic theology: purgative state, illuminative state, and unitive state. Purgative is a beginner Christian. Illuminative is the one who is already a Christian, goes to church, does everything he can, does his best in obedience. And unitive state, only few Christians can achieve. This is the moral perfection. Only few Christians can achieve this. Not everybody can. There are special people within Catholic Church. So Catholic Church teaches Christian perfection, giving away of all sin. I've got a definition of perfection. I've got this couple of definitions here from Catholic sources. A constant awareness of God's presence and a habitual disposition of conformity to the will of God. Doesn't it sound nice? Sounds very interesting. And the next one is state where people are freed from sinful passions. So I did mention just a moment ago that not everybody can achieve this state of perfection. There are some people in Catholic Church who do. And here is the quote from Jeffrey Maris, a Catholic theologian. The title, "Why Be a Catholic? Perfection." This is from his article. Now the entire Catholic economy is ordered towards this goal, moral, sinful perfectionism. Through her scripture and tradition, her governance and her sacraments, the Catholic Church alone teaches, rules and sanctifies to effect the perfection of man through union with God. Anyone who doubts that the Catholic Church possesses the greatest understanding of perfection and the greatest ability to achieve it in her children need only study the lives of the saints. In every age, these extraordinary men and women demonstrate the heights of both human accomplishment and human happiness. Isn't that interesting? Did you know that the Catholic Church teaches perfection? This is a very interesting, and it's only possible because of this, because of the mixture of sanctification and justification, where the two become one. And sanctification becomes the ground of salvation, and therefore, obviously, you can become perfect. And that's exactly what Catholic Church teaches. But most people do not become perfect. So what happens if believer is not good enough to get to heaven? Oh, Catholic Church has developed great idea. This is genius. They developed safety nets. Do you know what the safety nets are for? All right, yeah. I mean, if you ever been to a circus, right? You've got these acrobats doing all kinds of things up there, but you will notice that down just above the ground level, you've got nets. What are the nets for? The nets are for in case something happened, okay, and the person up there makes a mistake. I mean, on trapezes and all kinds, mistakes happen. They fall down, they fall onto the net. They don't fall to the ground and kill themselves. The net basically stops they fall to the ground. So similar with Catholic Church. Catholic Church developed one net after another. What I'm going to show you comes straight from Catholic Catechism, and if anybody tells you that it does not, don't believe them. When I was teaching this some time ago, one of my students took the teaching that I'm going to show you to the Catholic priest, and Catholic priest said, nothing like this happens in Catholic Church. Absolutely nothing. Don't believe those Adventists that they're teaching this kind of stuff. This does not happen. So the student was kind of confused. He wrote to me and said, Darius, I've talked to Catholic priest, and he told me nothing like this happens. So I went to a specific couple of pages of Catholic Catechism, scanned them, sent them to my student, and my student was, oh wow, this priest didn't know the Catholic Church actually teaches this. So this is straight from Catechism. I will tell you about two basic Catholic safety nets. The first one, the most important one, is called Treasury of Merits. So how does this work? On this slide, you see that two lines. One is the bottom line, the beginning of a Christian life, and the other one is the point where you reach salvation. Okay, so there is a point where you have to increase your justification until the moment when you reach the point of salvation. So let's say that we take a normal life of obtaining merits and increasing justification. So here is a person living their life, but they die before they're able to achieve the point of salvation. So what happens next? Well, within the Catholic Church, there were people who were perfect, who achieved the moral perfection. They are called saints. And this is a life of a saint. The saint has achieved the point at which they can gain salvation and more. Okay? So they've reached the level that when God assures salvation for them. You are saved, you've done everything you can, you perfect, you achieve the point of salvation, but you have more. Those are really good works, okay? They cannot be wasted because the person was ontologically righteous, internally righteous. The works were really good, they had a value. So they have to be somehow used. So God takes those works, those extra works, and put them in something that is called Treasury of Merits. And in heaven, there exists a thing that is called, I don't know how it looks, but there's a thing God keeps somewhere, a treasury of merits, of all the people who achieved the point of salvation and they have done more. So God keeps those good works, the works of St. Thomas, the works of St. Judith, the work of St. Paul, the works of Mary, Mother of Jesus, and all those good works are out there. So when at the point of death, a person can ask for the sacrament of anointment, the last sacrament, or if they die without that sacrament, the family can pay pray rather for that person to receive those, to receive the thing. So when the prayer is uttered, when people pray, when that person, just before they die, they pray, God does this. God takes the merits out of the treasury of merits and applies to that person, and look at that. Person achieved the point of salvation. So this is one safety net that Catholic Church has offered to its believers. If they not quite measure up with obedience, if they not quite reach that level of perfection required for heaven, there are good things, there are safety nets that God can actually help you with. Another brilliant safety net really is purgatory. Well, purgatory is a second chance. If you die and nobody prayed for you, and you were baptized as Catholic, but you were not able to get the grace of the last anointment, and you have nobody to pray for, or if you were not really good Catholic, you went to Mass every Sunday, or however often you wanted to go, but you were not really good Catholic. You just go to church, but during the week you did bad things, and then went to church and so on. There's always a second chance after you die. It's called purgatory. And in the purgatory, your soul, your immortal soul, is cleansed to the point that one day you are going to be clean enough to go to heaven. And Catholic Church has developed the whole process of cleansing and when those souls can be released to go to heaven and so on. And you can pray. If you know that your family somebody in your family ended up in purgatory, you can go and ask for prayers, and the people can be released from purgatory. And that's exactly what happened before the Reformation. Have you heard the concept of indulgences? Ellen White writes about this in Great Controversy. So this was this guy, John Tetzel, fundraising for the St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, and he is using purgatory to fundraise. He goes around and he teaches, what was that saying? If a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs, right? So if people pay, their parents may get out of purgatory. And that's how church fundraised, using this whole concept of purgatory, a second chance. As a result, and this happened just before the Reformation, the church became a very interesting place. I'll talk about this in a moment. Let me just summarize what I said, and we're just about done. So we've got justification and sanctification combined together, amalgamated into one thing, this green ball. Sanctification becomes a ground of salvation. Your obedience is the key to salvation. As I say here, believers' obedience becomes the key to salvation. Desired end result is state of perfection. It's not reckoned as perfect. It's being perfect. You reach the point of perfection. At death, there's investigation and eternal allocation. And don't worry too much. There are plenty of safety nets that can catch you if you are not good enough. So the church before the Reformation became this one giant salvation vending machine. You will put a coin and you get what you want. And this is the state of the church encountered by the Reformers, because it created a lot of abuse. The church held salvation in its hands and was controlling salvation and fundraising over the salvation. There was a lot of abuse and corruption. And that's why Reformation was absolutely necessary. So let me just summarize the Roman Catholic way of salvation. Human beings are born guilty, but free and able to cooperate with God. And then if there's life without God, before they become Catholics, before they become baptized, at one point they experience conversion, and this is the moment of baptism. This is the baptism point where you are justified by faith. And what do you do after this? After infusion of grace, becoming righteous, you lead a Christian life, obedience, life of cooperation with God, doing good works, obedience to the commandments, and accumulate, by your obedience, you accumulate a merit. Then there's a point of death. At the point of death, there's a final judgment, and God is measuring you. How much good works have you done? And what am I going to do with you? What am I going to do with you? I've got three choices, okay? Either eternity in heaven, if you were a good Catholic, or purgatory, if you were not so good, or hell, if you committed lots of mortal sins and never ever came back to God. But most Catholics actually go to heaven, some will end up in purgatory. So as you see, on this road to salvation, the Catholic, in my opinion, the Catholic car of soteriology ended up in the ditch, because it focused on human works, on human obedience, of leading human to the state of perfection and providing safety nets for those who could not, because there are some people who did achieve this, but as a result of focusing on human works, of focusing on the goodness of human nature, that humans can do it, it ended up in the ditch. And this is why Reformation was absolutely essential, and this is the topic of next presentation.